On the surface, their Manhattan penthouse glowed with everything success was supposed to look like: polished marble floors, skyline views, a marriage framed in filtered photos. But that night, as Madeline's phone lit up beside a half-finished glass of wine, the name on the screen didn't belong to her husband. Adrian noticed the way she turned it face down too quickly, the way silence thickened between them like smoke that had nowhere to escape. Some empires fall in a single night. Others begin the moment you realize you've already lost something priceless. If stories about love, betrayal, and the quiet wars behind closed doors speak to you, stay a little longer. There are truths here that don't reveal themselves all at once. The penthouse always looked better at night. From 32 floors above the Hudson, Manhattan softened into something almost forgiving. Bridges lit like necklaces, traffic flowing in golden threads, the city humming with restless ambition. Inside, the apartment reflected a curated life. Abstract canvases Madeline had chosen, minimalist furniture Adrian insisted on, floor-to-ceiling windows that erased any boundary between private life and public skyline. Madeline stood barefoot near the glass, her reflection merging with the lights outside. She wore a silk blouse the color of deep wine, sleeves pushed up as she scrolled through her phone. The screen illuminated her face in fragments: cheekbone, brow, the faint crease between her eyebrows. Behind her, Adrian loosened his tie and placed his briefcase on the marble kitchen island. "Sorry I'm late," he said, though he didn't sound surprised by it. Late had become a personality trait. "It's fine," she replied, not turning around. The word fine hovered between them, delicate and false. Adrian moved to the wine rack, pouring himself a glass. He studied her reflection in the window rather than her directly. He noticed how quickly she angled her phone away when he stepped closer. A small gesture. Almost nothing. Almost. "Gallery went well?" he asked. "Yes. Connor finalized the funding for the spring installation." Connor. The name settled into the room with quiet weight. Adrian nodded. "That's good. You've been working toward that for months." She finally turned, offering a polite smile. "You remembered." He almost said, "Of course I did." Instead, he shrugged lightly. "I try." The truth was more complicated. He remembered milestones because he scheduled them. He remembered numbers, launch dates, investor calls. But the emotional texture of her days, her exhaustion, her excitement, had blurred into background noise. Her phone vibrated against the glass table behind her. She reached for it quickly. Too quickly. The screen lit up briefly before she flipped it face down. Adrian caught only a glimpse, a name beginning with C. He told himself it meant nothing. Connor was involved in the gallery expansion. Late messages happened in business. New York didn't sleep. Still, something in his chest tightened. Not jealousy exactly, but displacement. As if he were slowly being edited out of a story he thought he was writing. "You're quiet tonight," Madeline said. "So are you." A faint smile. Not warm. Not cold. Just practiced. They moved through the rest of the evening like actors who knew their blocking. Dinner reheated from the fridge. Conversation about logistics, her upcoming exhibition, his investor presentation in San Francisco. They spoke in headlines, not paragraphs. Later, Adrian stood alone in his home office, staring at a pitch deck glowing on his monitor. Cole Sentinel, Advanced Digital Infrastructure Security. His future compressed into bullet points and revenue projections. He should have felt adrenaline. Instead, he felt absence. Through the partially open door, he could hear Madeline laughing softly in the living room. Not the polite laugh she used at charity galas. Something looser. Intimate. He stepped into the hallway without thinking. She sat curled on the sofa, phone pressed to her ear. "No, I missed that too," she was saying, voice low. It felt easy. A pause. She noticed him then. Her laughter stopped. Her posture straightened. "I have to go," she murmured into the phone. "I'll call you tomorrow." She ended the call before he could speak. "Connor?" Adrian asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Yes," she replied, matching his neutrality with precision. "We're finalizing some details for the donor dinner. At 9:30 at night?" She held his gaze. "He's flying to Chicago tomorrow." A beat of silence. He could push. He could ask why her voice had sounded softer than professional, why she'd said she missed something. But confrontation required energy, and Adrian had spent his reserves building something he believed would secure their future. He nodded once. Right. She studied him carefully, as if waiting for accusation. When none came, she looked almost disappointed. He returned to his office. Behind the closed door, he leaned his hands against the desk and exhaled slowly. Doubt crept in, not loud, not dramatic, but persistent. He opened his laptop again, but the pitch deck blurred. His phone buzzed with a Slack notification from his CTO. Server migration complete. Another step toward launch. He typed a quick response, efficient and composed. Then, almost against his will, he opened Instagram. Madeline had posted earlier that evening a photo of them from last weekend's charity benefit, her hand resting lightly on his chest, skyline behind them. The caption read, "Building dreams together." The comments were full of admiration. Power couple. Goals. Inspiring. He stared at the image. He tried to remember what they'd talked about that night. He couldn't. In the living room, Madeline stood alone now, staring at the dark screen of her phone. Connor's name lingered in her call log. So did the memory of his hand brushing hers during a gallery walkthrough earlier that afternoon, an accidental touch that hadn't felt accidental. With Connor, she felt seen in ways she hadn't in years. He asked about her ideas, not just the budget. He noticed when she cut her hair. He lingered. With Adrian, everything had become strategy. She walked to the bedroom and paused at the doorway of his office. He didn't look up immediately. "Are you coming to bed?" she asked. "In a minute." She hesitated, then nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Adrian finally lifted his eyes from the screen. He knew something was shifting. He could feel it the way one senses a structural crack before it becomes visible. But instead of turning toward it, he turned back to his work. If something was slipping from his grasp, he would tighten his grip elsewhere. Outside, the city shimmered, indifferent, ambitious, unforgiving. Neither of them realized yet that this quiet night, this almost argument, this phone turned face down, marked the beginning of two very different paths. One toward another man, the other toward an empire. By the time March settled over Manhattan, Adrian no longer measured his days in hours, but in milestones. Beta testing complete. Investor dinner confirmed. Legal compliance review pending. The office Kohl's Sentinel rented in Midtown still smelled faintly of fresh paint and industrial carpet glue. Exposed brick walls, standing desks, glass conference rooms with whiteboards covered in diagrams of encrypted pathways. Adrian moved through the space with the focused precision of someone who believed momentum was survival. West Coast investors want revised projections, his CFO, Lena Park, said, tablet in hand. They're concerned about scaling too fast. "We're not scaling," Adrian replied, eyes on the financial model. "We're securing ground before someone else does." Lena studied him for a moment. "You've been here every night this week." He offered a thin smile. That's what founders do. What he didn't say was that staying late had begun to feel easier than going home. Across the river of traffic and noise, Madeline stood beneath track lighting at the Chelsea Gallery, overseeing the installation of a large-scale, mixed-media piece that would anchor the spring exhibition. Assistants moved around her with ladders and tape measures. The space smelled of plaster dust and fresh espresso. Connor Hayes leaned casually against a pillar, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened in a way that looked deliberate rather than careless. "You're overthinking the placement," he said gently. "It needs breathing room." Madeline crossed her arms, studying the canvas. "Breathing room costs square footage." "You have funding now," he reminded her. "You can afford to let it breathe." The funding. His funding. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Not inappropriate. No one in the room would have noticed anything unusual, but charged in a way that unsettled her. "You didn't have to stay this late," she said quietly. "I wanted to," he replied. "You care about this. I like seeing that." The words landed softly, but they echoed. At home, the penthouse lights glowed automatically at sunset, programmed to shift from cool white to warmer tones as night fell. Adrian arrived close to 11, the city clinging to him in the form of exhaustion and static. Madeline wasn't there. He checked the kitchen counter. No note. No text. He glanced at his phone. 7:42 p.m. Madeline. Gallery dinner with donors. Might be late. He hadn't responded. He poured himself a drink and stood by the window, watching ferries cut through dark water. His reflection looked sharper lately, almost severe. Success had begun carving him into something efficient and distant. At 11:36 p.m., the door opened quietly. Madeline stepped in, heels in one hand, hair slightly undone. There was a brightness in her expression he hadn't seen directed at him in months. "Good dinner?" he asked. She paused at the sound of his voice. "Yes. Productive." He nodded. "That's good." She waited, as if expecting something more, a question, perhaps, about who attended. But he simply returned his gaze to the skyline. "How was your day?" she tried. "Busy." Another silence. She moved toward the bedroom, then stopped. "Adrian, do you ever think we're just co-managing a life?" The question startled him more than it should have. "What does that mean?" "It means we schedule each other in. We update each other. But we don't really." She trailed off, searching for language. "We don't really show up." He exhaled slowly. "I'm building something for us." "I know." Her voice softened. "But sometimes it feels like you're building it alone." He turned then, finally facing her fully. "What do you want me to do, Madeline? Walk away from investors? Delay launch? This is the window. And what happens when the window closes on us?" The words lingered in the room. He had no clean answer. In her silence, she thought of Connor's steady attention earlier that evening. How he'd asked about her first exhibition years ago. How he'd remembered the name of her mentor without being prompted. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply present. Adrian saw something flicker across her face. Hesitation, maybe guilt, but misread it as frustration. "I can't slow down right now," he said carefully. "Not when we're this close." She nodded, a small surrender. "Of course." Later, lying side by side in the dark, the space between them felt wider than the king-sized mattress allowed. Madeline stared at the ceiling, phone resting on her chest. A message vibrated softly. "Connor, you were brilliant tonight. Don't let anyone make you feel small." Her thumb hovered. She typed, erased, typed again. "Thank you for staying." Across the bed, Adrian lay awake, eyes open. He sensed the faint glow from her screen, but didn't turn to look. Instead, he calculated revenue growth projections in his head, rehearsed tomorrow's investor call, forced his mind into measurable territory. If he could quantify risk, he could manage it. But marriage did not operate on spreadsheets. In the quiet dark, two different hungers expanded, one for recognition, one for control. Neither realized how quickly hunger becomes justification. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with sleepless ambition. Inside, the distance between them stretched another inch. The gallery was empty by the time the rain started. It came suddenly, drumming against the tall front windows of the Chelsea space, blurring the city into streaks of gray and amber. Assistants had left hours ago. The new installation stood illuminated under soft lights, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. Madeline remained near the center of the room, arms folded, studying the art as if it might answer something she hadn't asked aloud. Connor stood beside her, jacket slung over one shoulder. "You should go home," she said quietly. "It's late." "So should you." Neither moved. The rain intensified, isolating the gallery from the rest of Manhattan. The world outside felt distant, unreachable. "You were right about the spacing," she admitted. "It needed air." Connor glanced at her. "So do you." The comment was gentle, not flirtatious. That was what made it dangerous. Madeline let out a soft breath. "You don't know that. I see more than you think." Her first instinct was to deflect, to remind him of professional boundaries, of her marriage, of the life waiting in a penthouse overlooking the Hudson. But instead she asked, "What do you see?" He hesitated just long enough to make the answer deliberate. "I see someone who built something meaningful. And I see someone who doesn't get enough credit for it." The words slid under her skin. Adrian had always supported her career. He had funded early exhibitions, introduced her to donors, celebrated her milestones. But support had gradually turned into assumption. Of course she would succeed. Of course she would manage. Of course she understood he was busy. Connor watched her face carefully, aware of the line stretching between them. "This isn't about him," she said, though neither of them had spoken Adrian's name. "No," Connor replied softly. "It's about you." Silence settled, thicker than before. Madeline stepped away first, moving toward the back office. "There's a bar still open on 10th, she said over her shoulder. "If you're waiting out the rain." It was an invitation disguised as convenience. The bar was narrow and dim, filled with low conversation and the scent of whiskey. They sat at the far end, close but not touching. Outside, rain streaked down the windows like restless fingers. Connor ordered bourbon. Madeline chose red wine. "For the record," he said after a moment, "I don't make a habit of complicating married women's lives." She gave him a faint smile. "That's reassuring." "I mean it." "So do I," she said quietly. But neither stood up to leave. They spoke about the exhibition, about New York's shifting art market, about childhood cities, his in Boston, hers in Providence. The conversation drifted into memories, then into confession. "Do you ever feel," she began carefully, "like you're standing next to your own life instead of inside it?" Connor didn't answer immediately. "Every time I build something," he said finally, "there's a moment when it stops being personal and becomes strategic. That's when it starts to feel hollow." She thought of Adrian. The bourbon glass was nearly empty when Connor reached across the bar. Not boldly, not theatrically, just enough to brush her hand. She could have pulled away. She didn't. The contact was brief. Electric. A simple acknowledgement of something already present. Her heart pounded, not with romance, but with awareness. This is the moment, she thought. This is where you choose. Her phone buzzed inside her bag. "Adrian, investor dinner ran late. Heading home." The message was neutral, logistical. She stared at it for a few seconds too long. "You should go," Connor said quietly, noticing the change in her expression. She nodded. But when they stepped outside beneath the awning, rain still falling in soft sheets, neither moved toward a cab. Connor's voice dropped. "Madeline, if this is wrong, say it now." She searched his face, looking for recklessness. She found sincerity instead. "It is wrong," she whispered. And the city hummed around them, sirens in the distance, tires slicing through wet pavement. A couple hurried past, laughing under a shared umbrella. Madeline felt the weight of her marriage in that pause. The vows, the years, the version of herself who had believed ambition and love could expand together without conflict. She also felt the ache of being unseen. "I don't want to feel invisible anymore," she said. Connor stepped closer, close enough that the rain no longer reached her shoulders. He didn't kiss her immediately. He gave her space to step back. She didn't. When their lips finally met, it was restrained, almost cautious. Not a cinematic sweep, not a dramatic surrender. Just a crossing. A line you don't see until you're already on the other side. Back in Midtown, Adrian sat alone in the glass conference room, city lights reflecting in duplicate against the windows. His team had left hours ago. Financial projections glowed on the screen before him. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing behind his eyes. He told himself this was temporary, that once the launch succeeded, he would recalibrate. Take a vacation. Be present. Fix the distance he sensed but hadn't confronted. His phone remained silent. Across the city, Madeline sat in the back of a cab, rain tracing lines down the window beside her. Connor's kiss still lingered, not passionate, not wild, but undeniable. She pressed her fingers lightly to her lips. Guilt arrived slowly, like a delayed echo. At home, Adrian was already asleep when she slipped into the apartment. She stood for a moment in the dark bedroom, watching his steady breathing. He looked younger in sleep, softer. For a second, she nearly reached for him. Instead, she turned away and set her phone face down on the nightstand. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Inside, something irreversible had begun. Adrian had always trusted patterns. Patterns in code. Patterns in market behavior. Patterns in people. And lately, Madeline's patterns had shifted. It wasn't anything dramatic. She still came home most nights. She still asked about investor calls. She still posted carefully curated photos that suggested continuity. But the timing was off. Her phone was rarely out of reach. She smiled at messages she didn't share. She showered almost immediately after returning home, as if rinsing off the city before it could linger. Adrian noticed all of it. He just chose not to assemble the pieces. At Cole Sentinel's office, the pace intensified. A venture capital firm from San Francisco scheduled a final review before committing 8 figures. The air inside the conference room felt electrically thin. "You look exhausted," Lena said quietly after the meeting ended. "I'm fine. That's not what I meant." He closed his laptop with controlled precision. "We're 2 weeks from launch. Exhausted is acceptable." She studied him for a second longer than comfortable. "Just don't ignore what's happening outside this room." He met her gaze. "What's happening outside this room is exactly why this matters." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. That evening, Madeline arrived home earlier than usual. She set her keys down softly, as if testing whether the apartment was empty. It wasn't. Adrian stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables with unusual focus. "You're cooking?" she asked. "Thought I'd try something different." She watched him from the doorway. There had been a time when small gestures like this felt romantic. Now they felt like negotiations. "How was the gallery?" he asked without looking up. "Busy. With Connor." The knife paused mid-slice. "Just for a second." "Yes. We finalized the donor list." He resumed cutting. The question had slipped out more directly than he intended. Not accusatory, just factual. She moved closer, resting her palms on the counter. "You've been saying his name differently lately." He glanced up. "Differently how?" "Like it weighs something." He considered lying. Instead, he chose ambiguity. "He's investing a lot of money into your work." "That matters." "It does." Silence again. She wanted him to ask more. To push. To fight for something that was slipping. But Adrian had built his life on restraint. Emotional outbursts were inefficiencies. Later that night, while Madeline showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Adrian stared at it from across the room. He had never checked her phone before. Not once in 10 years of marriage. Trust, to him, had always been binary. You either had it or you didn't. The screen lit up again. "Connor, I keep thinking about last night." Adrian didn't need more than that. The words were visible in preview before the screen dimmed. He felt something cold move through him. Not rage, not yet. Something sharper. Clarifying. The shower turned off. He stepped away from the nightstand before she emerged, towel wrapped around her hair. "Everything okay?" she asked casually. "Yes." He didn't mention the message. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't confront her. Instead, he opened his laptop and began revising his pitch deck. If she had crossed a line, he would not unravel in response. He would fortify. In Chelsea the next afternoon, Madeline sat in Connor's office overlooking the High Line. Sunlight filtered through wide windows, illuminating architectural models spread across a polished table. "You're quiet," Connor observed. "Am I?" He leaned back in his chair. "You regret it." She looked down at her hands. "Regret is complicated." "Is he suspicious?" She hesitated. "He saw your message." Connor's jaw tightened slightly. "And?" He said nothing. "That's worse," Connor murmured. She exhaled. "You don't know him. Silence is control." "And what do you want?" The question unsettled her. What did she want? Not chaos. Not scandal. Not destruction. She wanted to feel chosen. With Adrian, she felt assumed. With Connor, she felt intentional. But intention had consequences. That evening, Adrian stayed late again. Not because he had to, but because the office felt cleaner than home. Logical. Predictable. He opened a forwarded email from the legal team. Contract drafts. Compliance updates. His mind worked efficiently, but beneath the focus ran a second thread of thought. "I keep thinking about last night." He replayed the message in his head, stripping it of ambiguity. There were only 2 possibilities: emotional intimacy or physical. Either one fractured something fundamental. He closed his eyes briefly. He could confront her, demand explanation, draw lines. But the launch was 12 days away. Investors were watching. The press had begun circling. A public unraveling now would ripple outward. So he made a decision, not out of forgiveness, but strategy. He would wait. He would gather certainty. And in the meantime, he would make himself untouchable. Back at the penthouse, Madeline stood alone by the window again, watching the city pulse below. She typed a message to Connor, erased it, typed again. Madeline, we need to be careful. The reply came almost instantly. Connor, or we need to be honest. She stared at the words. In the distance, sirens echoed through Manhattan's grid. Inside their marriage, no one was screaming. That was the most dangerous part. The email arrived at 6:12 a.m. Adrian was already awake. He had developed a habit of rising before dawn, when the city was still muted and the silence felt strategic rather than empty. He sat at the kitchen island with black coffee and his laptop, reviewing vendor invoices tied to the launch event scheduled for the following week. Cole Sentinel's debut would take place at a glass-walled event space overlooking Bryant Park. Press invited. Investors confirmed. A statement of arrival. His inbox refreshed automatically. Subject, updated contract. Hayes Development sponsorship, he frowned. Hayes Development was Connor's company. Adrian opened the attachment. It was a sponsorship agreement. Connor's firm contributing a substantial sum toward a joint philanthropic tech arts initiative that would be announced at the launch. A gesture of cross-industry collaboration. On paper, it was brilliant optics, cybersecurity innovation supporting cultural institutions. He scrolled further down. Attached were reimbursement records. One charge stood out. The Mercer Hotel, 2-night stay, corporate account, Hayes Development. Dates, March 14th to 16th. Adrian didn't need to check the calendar. March 14th was the night of the rainstorm. The night Madeline came home late, shoes in hand, hair slightly undone. His gaze moved lower. Additional line item, private dining reservation, the River Room. 2 guests. He stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for another interpretation to appear. There wasn't one. The facts were clean. Connor's corporate card. The Mercer. 2 nights. Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair. He did not slam the laptop shut. He did not curse. He did not throw the coffee mug against the marble. He inhaled once, deeply, then again. Across the bedroom, Madeline stirred, unaware that the axis of her life had just tilted. He replayed every small moment of the past weeks. The phone turned face down, the shower immediately after coming home, the brightness in her expression when she mentioned Connor's name. Proof rearranged memory into clarity. He forwarded the document to his private email. Not out of paranoia, out of preparation. By 8:30 a.m., Adrian was in Midtown, seated inside the glass conference room as his executive team discussed media positioning. We'll need to anticipate personal background questions, Lena said. Press always looks for a narrative hook. Founder story. Marriage. Lifestyle. Marriage. Adrian kept his expression neutral. Keep it focused on infrastructure security and national data integrity, he replied evenly. No lifestyle angles. Lena glanced at him. You sure? Investors like the human side. The human side is irrelevant. His voice left no room for debate. But inside, humiliation moved like acid. Not because she had chosen another man. Because she had done it quietly. Strategically. The same way he built companies. At noon, his phone buzzed. Madeline, lunch later? I thought we could look at that rooftop venue for the donor after party. He stared at the message. The audacity of normalcy. He typed back. Adrian, busy today. Big prep meetings. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Madeline, okay. Tonight? He did not respond. In Chelsea, Madeline stood in the gallery office, her pulse subtly elevated for reasons she couldn't name. Something in Adrian's brief reply felt colder than usual. Connor stepped into the doorway. You look distracted, he said. She forced a small smile. Just logistics. He closed the door behind him. Are we still pretending this is logistics? Her stomach tightened. This week is complicated, she murmured. For him? Or for you? For everything. Connor studied her carefully. If he finds out, he won't, she interrupted, too quickly. The certainty sounded fragile, even to her own ears. Back in Midtown, Adrian requested a private meeting with his legal counsel under the guise of restructuring personal assets ahead of potential public exposure. I want everything separated cleanly, he said, tone controlled. In case of volatility. Volatility in the market? The attorney asked. In life, Adrian replied. That evening, he arrived home before Madeline. He stood in the bedroom, holding the printed invoice from the mercer. The paper felt ordinary, weightless. He placed it back inside his briefcase. When she entered, she paused at the sight of him already there. You're home early, she said. So are you. A flicker of unease crossed her face. They moved through dinner quietly. No accusations. No raised voices. Halfway through the meal, Adrian set his fork down. How's Connor? He asked. The question was smooth. Casual. Her hand stilled around her wine glass. Why? Curious. He's fine. Adrian held her gaze steadily. You stayed at the Mercer last month, he said evenly. Not a question. Color drained subtly from her face. For a donor event, she replied, voice thin. With him. It was a statement. Silence expanded between them, dense and inescapable. She searched for an angle of denial, a technicality. There wasn't one. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. He simply watched her. And in that quiet scrutiny, she understood something terrifying. He knew. Not suspected. Knew. Her throat tightened. Adrian, I don't need details, he said calmly. I only need honesty. The word honesty landed heavier than accusation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because the truth, once spoken, would end the version of their marriage that still existed. He rose from the table slowly. We have a launch next week, he continued, voice steady as steel. Investors. Press. I suggest we remain composed. The restraint in his tone frightened her more than anger would have. You're not going to yell? She whispered. No. Why? He looked at her with something colder than rage. Because I have more important things to build. The sentence cut cleanly. She flinched as if struck. He walked past her toward the office, leaving her alone at the table, wine untouched, confession suspended in her chest. For the first time since the affair began, Madeline felt the full weight of consequence. Not exposure, not scandal, but the quiet realization that she might have underestimated the man she betrayed. In the other room, Adrian closed the office door and allowed himself exactly 10 seconds of stillness. Then he opened his laptop. If she had chosen another man, he would choose something else entirely, and he would make sure it could never be taken from him. The penthouse grew quieter after the confrontation. Not louder, not chaotic, quieter. Adrian no longer asked where Madeline had been. He no longer commented on her schedule. He did not check her phone again, nor did he bring up the Mercer. Instead, he recalibrated. He moved his suits into the guest room closet under the pretense of organizing for launch week. He began taking early morning calls from the balcony instead of the kitchen. He answered her questions with precision and minimal elaboration. It wasn't cruelty. It was containment. Madeline felt it immediately. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't accusing. He wasn't even cold in the obvious sense. He was composed, professionally, surgically composed. That composure felt like exile. 3 days before launch, she stood in the kitchen watching him review a printed run-of-show schedule for the Bryant Park event. You're really not going to talk about it? She asked quietly. He didn't look up. We did talk about it. No. You stated facts. That was sufficient. Her chest tightened. Adrian, this isn't a quarterly report. His jaw flexed slightly, but his tone remained even. You made a choice. And you? She challenged. You chose work. Every day? He finally lifted his gaze to hers. The eye contact was steady, unreadable. I never hid my work, he said. The distinction landed heavily. Madeline swallowed. I was lonely. And the solution was secrecy. The word secrecy lingered between them. She felt heat rise to her face. I didn't plan it. No one plans erosion, he replied calmly. It just happens when no one maintains the structure. The metaphor stung because it was shared language. Architecture. Infrastructure. Foundations. She stepped closer. So what now? Now, he said, returning to his papers. We behave like adults for the next 72 hours. And after that, he didn't answer. At Cole Sentinel's office, the atmosphere vibrated with anticipation. Media confirmations rolled in. Investors increased their attendance numbers. Social media teasers hinted at a major cybersecurity disruptor entering the market. Adrian moved through it all with heightened clarity. His team interpreted his intensity as leadership under pressure. Only Lena noticed the shift beneath it. "You look different," she said quietly as they stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking 6th Avenue. "Different how?" "Like you've already burned something down." He gave a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. "Sometimes fire clears space." She studied him carefully, but didn't press further. Meanwhile, Madeline found herself suspended between two worlds. Connor sensed the tension immediately when they met for coffee near the High Line. "He knows," she said without preamble. Connor leaned back slowly. "How much?" "Enough." "And?" "He's calm." Connor frowned. "That's not calm. That's calculation." She wrapped both hands around her cup to steady herself. "He wants us to act normal until his launch is over." "And you're agreeing to that?" "What choice do I have?" she whispered. "If this explodes publicly right now, it damages everything." Connor's expression hardened slightly. Everything meaning him. She flinched. Connor softened. "Madeline, I didn't get involved to be someone's secret." The irony was sharp. "You already are," she said. That night, the penthouse hosted a small pre-launch dinner for two key investors flying in from San Francisco. Madeline wore a tailored black dress, poised and elegant. Adrian introduced her with practiced warmth. "My wife runs one of the most promising contemporary galleries in the city," he said smoothly. She smiled on cue. To an outsider, they looked aligned. Successful. United. Under the table, their knees did not touch. One investor complimented the view. Another praised Adrian's resilience in leaving corporate security for entrepreneurial risk. Madeline watched her husband speak about vision and control, about anticipating threats before they materialized. The words felt double-edged. After the guests left, she remained standing in the living room while Adrian cleared glasses. "How can you do that?" she asked softly. "Do what?" "Perform." He set a glass carefully into the sink. "It's not performance. It's discipline." She stepped closer. "Do you even care?" The question hung fragile and dangerous. He turned slowly to face her. "Yes," he said, voice low. "I care." "Then why does it feel like you've already left?" His expression shifted, just slightly. A crack in the steel. "Because," he replied, "I don't recognize the person who stayed at the Mercer." The specificity stole her breath. "I was still me," she whispered. "No," he said quietly. "You were someone I wasn't invited to know." Silence flooded the room. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her, might finally let anger surface. Instead, he stepped back. "We'll discuss the rest next week," he said. After the launch, he walked toward the office and closed the door. Madeline stood alone in the reflection of the skyline, seeing two versions of herself layered in the glass. One composed, one unraveling. In the office, Adrian leaned both hands against his desk and allowed himself one brief exhale of raw emotion. It wasn't grief alone. It was humiliation. He had built systems designed to detect intrusion before damage occurred. And yet, in his own home, he had missed the breach until it was complete. He straightened. There would be no more blind spots. For now, there would be civility. And beneath that civility, a war neither of them had formally declared. Outside, Manhattan glittered with anticipation for something new. Inside, their marriage waited for impact. Bryant Park shimmered under controlled light. The event space was encased in glass, overlooking the winter-stripped trees and the grid of midtown traffic beyond. Inside, everything was deliberate. Sleek black panels bearing the Kohl's Sentinel logo, soft blue uplighting, a stage positioned to frame Adrian against the skyline like a declaration. Investors in tailored suits clustered near the bar. Tech journalists adjusted cameras. A low hum of anticipation threaded through the room. Adrian stood near the entrance, greeting guests with measured confidence. His suit was charcoal, perfectly cut. His expression, steady. Madeline arrived 20 minutes later. She wore ivory silk, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a clean twist. She looked composed, luminous even. The kind of woman photographers gravitated toward. For a brief second, when their eyes met across the room, something unspoken passed between them. Not reconciliation, coordination. He stepped forward, placed a light hand at her back for the cameras. The touch was polite, impersonal. You look incredible, he said softly. So do you. A photographer called their names. They turned in sync. Flash. To anyone watching, they were the embodiment of modern power, innovation and culture intertwined, ambition married to elegance. Across the room, Connor Hayes entered quietly. He wasn't on the main guest list, but as a sponsor tied to the philanthropic announcement, his presence was expected. He wore navy, understated but sharp. Madeline saw him immediately. So did Adrian. Connor's gaze flickered briefly to her, then to Adrian. The moment was short, but not invisible. Lena approached Adrian with a subtle urgency. Press from TechCore wants a quick pre-stage quote. I'll be there, he replied. As he stepped away, Madeline found herself momentarily alone near the bar. Connor moved toward her, careful not to appear hurried. You're stunning, he said under his breath. This isn't the place, she murmured. I know. Yet he remained close enough for their proximity to register. You look like a queen beside him, Connor added quietly. Do you feel like one? The question unsettled her more than she expected. Before she could answer, a journalist approached. Madeline Cole? Quick photo, please. She turned toward the camera. Connor stepped slightly back, but not far enough. The photographer captured 3 frames in quick succession. In the second frame, Connor leaned toward her, saying something only she could hear. In the third, she smiled, not the public smile she'd practiced, but something softer. By the time Adrian took the stage, the photo had already been uploaded to a freelance photographer's live feed. He stood at the podium, lights warming his face. Tonight, he began, voice steady and resonant. We launched not just a company, but a safeguard. In a world where data is currency, protection is power. Applause. He spoke about infrastructure integrity, about anticipating unseen threats. He spoke about resilience. As he did, a notification buzzed in Lena's hand backstage. She glanced down. A tag post was gaining traction. At CityLens Media, power couple energy tonight at #ColeSentinel launch. But who's the third in the frame? Attached, the photo. Madeline and Connor, too close. Too familiar. The caption was subtle. The implication was not. Lena's stomach dropped. She moved toward Adrian's assistant, whispering quickly. On stage, Adrian continued flawlessly, unaware that digital murmurs were beginning to swell. Connor saw it first. His phone vibrated repeatedly. He glanced down, jaw tightening. Madeline felt the shift before she saw the evidence. A few guests were no longer watching the stage. They were watching her. She opened Instagram. The photo filled her screen. Zoomed in, their proximity looked intimate. The softness in her expression undeniable. Comments were multiplying. Who's he? That doesn't look professional. Isn't she married? Her pulse quickened. Across the room, Adrian concluded his speech to standing applause. As he stepped down, Lena intercepted him. You need to see this, she said quietly, holding out her phone. He looked. For a fraction of a second. Just one. The composure cracked behind his eyes. Then it sealed again. How far? He asked calmly. Growing. Fast. He inhaled slowly. Control the narrative, he said. Emphasize sponsorship. Professional partnership. And the comments? Disable them on our official page. His gaze shifted toward Madeline. She stood near the bar, phone in hand, face pale. Connor was no longer beside her. Adrian crossed the room deliberately. Every step measured. Guests parted subtly to make space. He stopped in front of her. Put the phone away, he said quietly. She looked up at him, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something like regret. It's spreading, she whispered. I know. I didn't. Not here, he said evenly. A journalist approached, smiling too brightly. Adrian, quick question about the philanthropic partnership with Hayes Development. Adrian didn't hesitate. Yes, he replied smoothly. Connor Hayes has been instrumental in expanding our outreach into the arts community. My wife's gallery is a vital part of that vision. He placed a firm, deliberate hand at Madeline's back again. Ownership. Control. The journalist nodded, scribbling notes. From a distance, the scene looked unified. Up close, Madeline felt the tension in his fingers, tight, unyielding. The rest of the evening blurred into strategic smiles and calculated answers. By the time the last guest left and the lights dimmed, the photo had been shared across multiple local feeds. Speculation wasn't confirmed, but it was alive. Back in the penthouse, the silence was no longer quiet. It vibrated. Madeline stood by the window, staring at her reflection fractured by city light. Adrian removed his jacket slowly, methodically. "You should have been more careful," he said at last. Her voice trembled. "I didn't think. That's the problem." She turned toward him. "Are you embarrassed?" He met her gaze. "Yes." The honesty cut deeper than anger. "Is it over?" she asked, barely audible. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he loosened his cufflinks and set them down on the dresser with precise care. "Tonight wasn't the end," he said quietly. "It was exposure." The word lingered. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with digital chatter. Inside, the glass walls of their life no longer felt protective. They felt transparent. The city was quieter after midnight. Traffic softened into a distant hush, and the penthouse, once a stage, felt stripped of lighting and applause. No guests, no cameras, no narrative to manage. Just two people standing in the ruins of something they had built carefully and then neglected. Madeline remained by the window, arms wrapped around herself as if cold. Adrian stood near the kitchen island, jacket off, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. The air between them felt charged, unstable. "You said tonight was exposure," she began. "So let's stop pretending." He looked at her evenly. "I haven't been pretending." "Yes, you have." Her voice trembled, but she didn't retreat. "You've been controlled. Strategic. Like this is another crisis to mitigate." "It is a crisis," he replied. "It's our marriage. And you treated it like a secret." The words landed hard. She flinched, but didn't look away. "I didn't wake up one morning planning to betray you." "No one does," he said. "They just justify it long enough for it to happen." She stepped toward him. "Do you want the truth?" "I already have the facts." "That's not the same thing." Silence. He nodded once. "Fine. Tell me." Her throat tightened, but once she began, the words came faster than she expected. "I was lonely," she said. "Not because you weren't physically there. Because when you were there, you weren't with me. Every conversation became about risk, projections, strategy. I stopped feeling like your wife. I felt like part of your infrastructure." The metaphor hung between them. He absorbed it without interruption. "You used to ask me about my ideas," she continued. "About what I wanted to build. Somewhere along the way, I became adjacent to your ambition, not inside it." "And Connor fixed that?" Adrian asked quietly. "He noticed," she replied. "He listened. He stayed when I talked. And you rewarded that with intimacy." The precision of his tone sliced through her. "Yes," she said, forcing the word out. "I crossed the line." He inhaled slowly, jaw tightening. "I worked," he said, "for us. For stability. For scale. So we would never have to worry." "I didn't need scale," she whispered. "I needed you." The simplicity of it hit harder than accusation. He turned away briefly, hands braced against the counter. For the first time, his composure fractured visibly. "You think I didn't feel pressure?" he asked, voice lower now. "Every investor call, every risk calculation, it wasn't ego. It was responsibility. I never asked you to carry it alone. You never said you were leaving." "I didn't leave," she said sharply. "I got lost." He faced her again. "You checked into a hotel with another man." The clarity of the statement erased metaphor. Tears filled her eyes, but didn't fall. "I know. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" "I didn't think you were looking." The answer stunned him. He laughed once, short, humorless. "You're right," he admitted. "I wasn't." That was the first shared confession. He hadn't been watching. He had assumed solidity where there was erosion. "I should have seen it," he said quietly. "The distance. The silence. I thought it was temporary. I thought once the launch was over, I'd recalibrate." "You kept postponing us," she replied. "And you replaced us." The words lingered, raw. They stood facing each other, the magnitude of damage fully visible now. No performance. No strategy. "Do you love him?" Adrian asked. The question hovered fragile and devastating. Madeline closed her eyes briefly. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I know I felt alive. I know I felt chosen." He absorbed that without visible reaction, though something shifted behind his eyes. "And do you love me?" he asked. Her voice broke. "Yes." The contradiction filled the room. He studied her for a long moment, searching for manipulation. He found confusion instead. Guilt, desire, regret. "Love isn't the problem," he said finally. "Integrity is." She stepped closer, just within reach. "Is there any version of this where we fix it?" He didn't answer immediately. Outside, a siren wailed faintly, then faded. "I don't know," he said at last. "But I know I can't build a future on uncertainty." "You're already building an empire," she whispered. He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said, "and empires don't survive internal betrayal." The metaphor wasn't about business anymore. Tears slipped down her cheeks now, unguarded. "So what are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying," he replied evenly, "that I won't compete for my own marriage." The sentence was calm, absolute. She felt something collapse inside her, not dramatically, not theatrically. Just the quiet realization that control had shifted beyond her reach. "I never wanted to destroy us," she whispered. "Neither did I." Silence expanded again, but it felt different now. Not avoidance. Finality forming. After a moment, Adrian walked past her toward the guest room. He paused at the doorway. "I'll speak with my attorney tomorrow," he said quietly. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. She closed her eyes. "And Connor," he added. She hesitated. "I'll end it." He nodded once. "Do that," he said. The door closed softly behind him. Madeline remained in the center of the living room, surrounded by art she had chosen and windows that reflected a city obsessed with ambition. For the first time, she understood that being chosen by someone new did not erase the cost of abandoning what she once had. In the guest room, Adrian sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark screen of his phone. He felt grief. He felt humiliation. But beneath both, something steadier was forming. If love had fractured under pressure, then he would build something that did not. Not to replace it, but to survive it. Outside, Manhattan glittered with relentless opportunity. Inside, a marriage stood at the edge of its final decision. The attorney's office overlooked Central Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed bare trees and pale winter light, the kind that made everything appear sharper than it felt. Adrian sat across from a polished oak desk, hands folded, posture composed. "I'm not here for spectacle," he said calmly. "I want separation filed discreetly." The attorney, a woman in her mid-40s with deliberate eyes, nodded. "Grounds. Irreconcilable differences." She studied him briefly. "Is there infidelity involved?" A pause. "Yes." Her expression didn't change. "Do you intend to pursue fault?" "No." That answer surprised even him slightly. But revenge would tether him to the damage. He didn't want tethering. He wanted movement. "Asset division will require documentation," she continued. "Given the timing of your company launch, publicity is a factor." "I'm aware." He had already begun restructuring holdings. Separate accounts. Clean delineation between personal and corporate exposure. Control, restored in increments. When he stepped back onto the sidewalk, the air was cold enough to sting. He welcomed it. The physical sharpness anchored him. His phone vibrated. "Lena, West Coast Fund confirmed. We're officially oversubscribed." He closed his eyes briefly. Oversubscribed. Demand exceeding supply. He typed back. "Adrian, good. Let's accelerate phase 2. That night, Madeline sat across from Connor in his office, sunlight fading behind steel and glass. "It's over," she said quietly. Connor leaned forward. "Between you and him?" "Between you and me." The distinction landed heavily. His jaw tightened. "Because he found out." "Yes. And I'm not leaving one marriage just to hide inside another complication." He exhaled sharply. "Is that what I am? A complication?" "You were clarity," she admitted. "But clarity under pressure isn't always truth." Connor stood, pacing once before stopping in front of her. "I didn't ask you to choose," he said. "You didn't have to." Silence stretched. "Does he want you back?" Connor asked finally. She hesitated. "I don't know if that's the question anymore." She left before he could answer. Back at the penthouse, half the closet was empty. Adrian had moved essential items into the guest room with efficient restraint. No dramatic packing. No symbolic gestures. Just space created, Madeline stood in the doorway, absorbing the visual confirmation of distance. "You filed?" she asked quietly. "Yes." The word felt like a door closing. "For separation?" "For now." She stepped inside the guest room, careful, as if entering foreign territory. "Is there anything I can say that changes this?" she asked. He met her gaze steadily. "You could have said it months ago." The regret in her expression was unfiltered now. "I ended it," she whispered. "With him. I assumed you would." "Does that matter?" He considered the question honestly. "It matters to your integrity," he said. "Not to my decision." She absorbed that slowly. "So this is it," she said. "This is clarity," he replied. The word echoed their earlier confrontation. She looked around the guest room. Temporary furniture, minimal decor, functional space. "You're choosing the company," she said. "I'm choosing myself." The correction was subtle but definitive. In the days that followed, Adrian's schedule intensified. Interviews, expansion talks, strategic partnerships. He moved with heightened precision, as if channeling every fractured emotion into measurable progress. Industry publications began profiling him, the relentless founder, the architect of digital security. None mentioned his marriage. Madeline watched from a distance, sometimes through news articles, sometimes through the quiet absence in their home. Her own professional circles felt colder now. Whispers lingered, though nothing had been confirmed publicly. The launch photos still floated in certain online threads, speculation unresolved. Connor did not call again. One evening, she stood in the gallery alone after closing, staring at a blank wall where the next exhibition would hang. For the first time, the space felt uncertain. She had wanted to feel chosen. Now she felt accountable. Back in Midtown, Adrian stood alone in the Kohl's Sentinel office long after his team had left. The city lights reflected against the glass walls, duplicating him in endless angles. He thought of the night he saw the Mercer invoice, of the launch photo, of her voice asking if there was any version of this where they fixed it. He felt the ache still. It hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled him. He opened a new document. Expansion strategy, international rollout. His empire would not be built from vengeance. It would be built from focus. Pain, redirected. Across the river, Madeline returned to the penthouse and paused at the threshold. The apartment felt larger now, quieter. She understood, finally, that loneliness was not solved by proximity to another man. It was solved by honesty, something she had delayed too long. In the guest room, Adrian turned off the light. The separation papers would move forward quietly. No public scandal. No dramatic collapse. Just two adults acknowledging that something essential had broken. He lay awake in the dark, listening to the muted hum of Manhattan beyond the windows. She had chosen another man. He had chosen to build. And for the first time since the fracture began, the path ahead felt singular. Not painless, but clear. Success, Adrian discovered, was loud in public and silent in private. Kohl's Sentinel's valuation doubled within 3 months of launch. Trade publications ran headlines about aggressive expansion. Podcasts invited him to speak about leadership under pressure. He accepted the invitations. He spoke about resilience, about staying focused when distractions threaten momentum, about safeguarding what matters. The irony never reached his voice. His Midtown office expanded to another floor. More engineers, more glass, more screens displaying real-time security analytics. At night, though, when the staff left and the lights dimmed automatically, the space felt hollow. He no longer went back to the penthouse regularly. He'd leased a minimalist apartment in Tribeca, temporary, efficient, impersonal. There were no art pieces on the walls, no shared photographs, just clean lines and silence. Meanwhile, Madeline's world narrowed. The art community in Manhattan thrived on perception. Nothing had been officially confirmed about the launch photo, but silence had become its own narrative. A donor postponed a contribution. A board member suggested reassessing public alignment with corporate partners. At the gallery, conversations softened when she entered. No one accused her outright. They didn't need to. She stood in front of a half-installed exhibit one afternoon, clipboard in hand, and realized she was no longer certain whether the tension in the room was professional stress or something more personal. Her assistant, Clara, approached carefully. Are we still moving forward with the Hayes development collaboration? Clara asked. The question was neutral. Administrative. Madeline hesitated. No, she said finally. We're restructuring. Clara nodded, relief barely concealed. Connor had faded from her life almost as quietly as he entered it. Their final conversation replayed in her mind sometimes. Not romantic, not dramatic. Just unfinished. He had texted once after she left his office. Connor, if you ever choose differently, you know where to find me. She never responded, because choosing differently now would not undo what had already fractured. One evening, she attended a small gallery opening alone. The room buzzed with curated laughter and low lighting. She felt every glance linger half a second too long. A fellow curator approached her, wine glass in hand. Rough season, he said sympathetically. New York eats power couples alive. She offered a polite smile. We weren't eaten. No. She considered the word. No, she said quietly. We unraveled. Across town, Adrian sat on a podcast stage beneath soft studio lights. What would you say was the hardest part of building Cole Sentinel? The host asked. He paused, just slightly. Letting go of what wasn't aligned, he replied. The answer sounded purely strategic. Only he knew it wasn't. Later that night, alone in his Tribeca apartment, he scrolled through industry news. His company's name appeared repeatedly. Momentum was real. So was the absence. He thought about texting her sometimes. Not to reconcile, not to accuse. Just to ask if she was all right. He never did. Pride? Maybe. Or clarity. Madeline stood in the penthouse one Sunday morning, sunlight flooding the living room. She had removed several framed photographs from the shelves. The empty spaces felt honest. She picked up her phone and opened Adrian's latest interview clip. He looked composed, focused, untouchable. For a moment, she felt a flicker of the same admiration that had once drawn her to him. Then she felt something else. Loss, not of status, not of comfort, but of the version of themselves that had once believed ambition and intimacy could grow side by side without maintenance. Her phone buzzed. An email from the gallery board. Subject, quarterly review, attendance metrics decline. She closed her eyes briefly. Consequences were rarely dramatic. They accumulated. Adrian attended a private investor dinner the following week. The conversation turned personal over dessert. Your wife couldn't make it tonight? One investor asked casually. Adrian met his gaze evenly. We're separated. A brief pause at the table. Then polite nods. Business resumed. No scandal. No spectacle. Just adjustment. That night, walking back through Midtown, Adrian felt the city pressing in around him. Bright billboards, digital tickers, glass towers reflecting ambition in every direction. He had chosen this, and it was working. But success did not erase memory. Back at the penthouse, Madeline stood by the window once more, the skyline unchanged. She understood now that Connor had not been an escape. He had been a mirror, reflecting what was missing. But the missing piece had never been another man. It had been conversation, attention, maintenance. Things neither of them had prioritized until it was too late. She picked up her phone, typed Adrian's name, then stopped. Some bridges collapsed quietly. Rebuilding requires two architects. In Tribeca, Adrian turned off the lights and stood for a moment in the dark. He had built something powerful. He had protected his company from collapse. But there were structures that, once fractured, required more than discipline to repair. He wasn't sure he still wanted to try. Outside, Manhattan thrived on reinvention. Inside, both of them were learning that reinvention carried a cost. 6 months later, Cole Sentinel occupied 3 floors in Midtown. The company logo glowed across a digital billboard overlooking Times Square for 1 week as part of a cybersecurity awareness campaign. Adrian hadn't requested the spectacle. His marketing team had insisted. Visibility builds authority, Lena had told him. Standing across the street that evening, hands in his coat pockets, Adrian watched his name attached to something enormous and undeniable. The empire was real now. International contracts, federal partnerships, a valuation that placed him in rooms he once had to request entry into. His phone buzzed with congratulations from industry leaders. He silenced it. Success had texture, sharp, metallic, efficient. It filled space quickly, but it did not soften memory. Across town, Madeline prepared for her gallery's new exhibition, smaller in scale than previous seasons, more experimental. She had stepped away from large corporate sponsorships, rebuilding donor relationships slowly, privately. Attendance numbers had stabilized. Not spectacular, but steady. So was she. She moved differently now, less performative, more deliberate. She no longer posted curated images of perfection. When she spoke in meetings, her voice carried clarity rather than the subtle strain of being unseen. Loneliness had forced introspection. Regret had forced growth. The night of Adrian's billboard campaign, she saw the image online before she saw it in person. A friend texted a photo from Times Square. "Your ex is everywhere." She stared at the image for a long moment. He looked composed in the promotional video clip, focused, assured, untouchable. She wondered if he felt that way. A week later, by coincidence rather than design, they found themselves in the same room. A mutual acquaintance hosted a private benefit supporting arts and tech education, an intersection neither of them could entirely avoid. The venue overlooked the Hudson, glass walls reflecting the water's dark surface. Madeline arrived first. Adrian entered 20 minutes later. Their eyes met across the room. No shock, no drama, just recognition. He crossed toward her, unhurried. "Madeline," he said. "Adrian." They stood facing each other. No cameras this time. No investors listening. "You look well," he observed. "I am," she replied. "You?" He considered the question honestly. "Yes." There was no hostility left in his tone. No visible wound. Just distance that had settled into acceptance. "I saw the billboard," she said. He gave a faint smile. "Hard to miss." "You built what you said you would." "Yes." A pause. "And you?" he asked. "The gallery? It's quieter. But it's mine." He nodded slightly, understanding more than the words conveyed. For a moment, neither spoke. Around them, guests mingled. Glasses clinked. Conversations rose and fell. "I'm sorry," she said finally, not theatrically, not urgently. Simply, for the secrecy, for the damage. He held her gaze. "I know," he said. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't condemnation either. It was acknowledgement. "I thought choosing someone else would make me feel powerful," she continued softly. "It didn't. It just showed me what I hadn't maintained." He absorbed that quietly. "I thought building something bigger would erase the humiliation," he admitted. It didn't. The honesty surprised them both. "But it gave you direction," she said. "Yes. And maybe that's what we were missing," she added. Direction together. The statement hung in the air, not as a proposal, but as a realization too late to act on. He looked out toward the river briefly. "Empires are easier," he said. "They don't require vulnerability." She gave a small, sad smile. "That's why they're lonely." Their eyes met again, softer now. No attempt to renegotiate. No dramatic reconsideration. Just two people who had once loved each other deeply, standing on opposite sides of a choice. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I'm aligned," he replied. She nodded. "That sounds like you." An announcement called guests toward the main hall. He stepped back slightly. "Take care of yourself, Madeline." "You too, Adrian." They moved in opposite directions. Later that night, Adrian returned to his Tribeca apartment and stood by the window overlooking the city he had conquered in measurable ways. He felt pride. He felt solitude. He understood, finally, that building an empire did not make him invulnerable. It simply gave structure to his resilience. Across the river, Madeline walked home alone beneath streetlights reflecting on wet pavement. She felt regret, yes, but also clarity. She had chosen another man once, searching for something she believed she lacked. What she lacked had not been love. It had been communication, maintenance, shared ambition nurtured instead of assumed. Both of them had paid the price. Manhattan pulsed on, indifferent, luminous, full of reinvention. Some stories end in reconciliation. Theirs ended in awareness. She chose another man. He chose to build his empire. And in the quiet after ambition and betrayal had settled, what remained was not victory, but growth.